dopes. Hello, everyone. I'm Cybersmily.
I am your co-host, Wisdom, and well, first of all, greetings, programs, and we had a guest star lined up for today's show. We were pretty excited. We were going to have Thaddeus Howes, co-creator of Interface Magazine, on the show, but at the last minute, he's got some stuff going on, and we're going to have to reschedule that. I apologize to everyone in the audience. And I hope Thaddeus, I hope you can get everything taken care of, and I hope
Be
you get some
safe.
AC, man. That would suck so bad. It's in the hundreds here, and I couldn't imagine being without AC in the house. Like, it's bad enough to get in the car.
House and keep his computer online. Yeah, so I know where we promoted it as Thaddeus, but hopefully you'll be able to discussion about gangs.
Yeah, yeah. We're gonna talk about the pre-existing gangs, gangs we've made up, how we run gangs, what like the gang atmosphere is like in our games, and how you can incorporate them into yours.
But before we start, just some various news across the Cyberpunk world. First off, to congratulate John, Mac, and Audrey who joined us last episode from Monster Fight Club. Their Kickstarter for Combat Zone, Cyberpunk Red Combat Zone Vehicle Mayhem Kickstarter just finished up this week. Reached 173,000, about 575% of their goal, which was 30K. Very excited. I was actually monitoring Discord as it was going, and they raised like 30K in the last 24 hours. So kudos to them. Can't wait for my stuff.
Yeah, and it looks like it's going to be a fantastic product.
Other thing is a DLC dropped from Altor Sorian, Toggle's Temple, which is a kind of a tribute to Black Hand's weapon guide. It contains pretty much say every single weapon that has been missing from 2020 in red, and it is well documented. So
Yeah, it gives you back some of that gun porn you guys have been missing.
for all the guns, apparently, we're just waiting for a DLC to happen. That is. And one thing I kind of like with this is they kind of give you a random chart, create your own type of gun. Various gun makers that are out there or weaponsmiths that are out there.
You can get brand names.
Yeah, brand names, and it also gives you notes of like, hey, if you're going to buy something from Budget Arms, it's poor quality. You're going to buy Malorian, it's going to be excellent quality. Stuff like that.
I
Definitely
really like that Cao Tang went from being like a cheap, like Budget Arms, like just crap weapons, to one of the premier weapons manufacturers in the time of the Red. That was a nice little evolution.
Yeah, and I think, well, again, I think we talked about a past episode how, China and India time really were still kind of behind the curve.
They were still
Yeah.
fairly underdeveloped at the time. Like
Yeah.
they were powerhouses, but technologically they were still on the back in the 80s and 90s. They were still climbing the ladder, as it were.
Yep.
Their stuff was seen as cheap and unreliable. I mean, that was the popular joke with everything. Oh, it broke. It must have been made in China.
Definitely go out to Artisling. Did add good attachments with this. So, and there's more stuff. Specifically, Toggle's Temple, which is
Love the lore.
yeah, I love that there's a cover charge to shop. Way to suck out.
We didn't get a chance to mention it last episode, but we'd like to mention it now. We lost a great artist, Scott Ruggles, who had been with Artal Sorian since the beginning. He passed away. It's like he's the one who created the original image for the AV4. So every AV that followed after it owes something to him. In addition to many other iconic shots, his ink wash work was fantastic. So I didn't want to go much further without mentioning that before I forgot, because I didn't bring it up last time.
Well, he was also a contributor to the game.
Yes, he was. Anyway, sorry about bringing everybody down. We'll get back to the happier news.
Their new Cyberpunk Edgerunners mission kit is now available for purchase. Got my box set.
I have not gotten mine yet. I'm very upset.
Really?
Well,
I like the dice, however, I will not be able to read.
Yeah, I saw that. A little bit of color clash there.
Well, it's color clash, but my old eyes just.
Yeah.
If I yeah, so they have like a circuit board. Nice. Yeah, so that's going on with the game. I haven't seen anything coming out. Oh, there was a thing that someone has called Pantheon, which is on AMC Plus. Two people have already started watching it, and they said it's pretty good. Have a
I don't have it either. I've heard good things. They've announced a couple of updates to Blade Runner, a couple of new casting decisions. I don't have that information in front of me, but I remember being excited about it.
And I know
I'm sorry, guys. We really got caught with our pants down on this episode.
yeah, it's fine. And also IMD actual for Neuromancer, which is going to be coming out. Oh. There's 2 pages out on IMDb Neuromancer. Premium. Any new end. Other news is GDPR has started doing Boston.
Oh yeah.
Oh, oh, this is there now. Oh, and then see Ryan. I don't know anything, and they know stuff about Orion.
Yeah, unless they're going to show you their CDPR employee security pass, I'm not buying anything they're telling me.
Yeah, and it was interesting that there was some leak about files. There was plans to for 2077 to be able to get to a colony, but it was just like very high level diagram. But when I saw them, I was like,
That doesn't sound
lunar
right.
colony or possibly an other settlement.
That would make more sense.
Because lunar colonies, so, but anyways, yeah, so that's kind of news that any comic news that you heard.
I mean, the last time we talked about comics, I mentioned Rat City from Image, which is part of the Spawn lineup. It's pretty minimal on the Spawn stuff and pretty high on the Cyberpunk stuff. Like it's almost straight Cyberpunk. Although it seems to be getting, with the latest issue, it does seem to be getting more into the Spawny type stuff with superpowers, and that'll probably ruin it. But up to now, it's been pretty good. It's been about veterans with cyber limbs who the corporation has been experimenting on their cyber limbs, and like it's pure cyberpunk. It's badass, but then superpowers come along and ruin everything.
Dark Horse is just started a new series called Kickdown. Marchuka.
Yeah, I haven't been able to get a copy of that yet, so I haven't
Well,
checked it out.
it just got published today, so
Yeah.
definitely. Oh, episode.
World Tree is still crazy. It's still nuts. Um, Especially from like a hacker corporate angle. It's it's crazy, and it's very cyberpunk. Yeah, I gave the premise for it a few episodes back, but yeah, it's still hacker creates a program in the dark web that kind of takes on its own life and becomes almost like a demonic entity possessing people. That's really that's simplifying it too much. It's really good. Check it out. Yeah. There's yet another Spider-Man 2099 series, Symbiote Spider-Man 2099, where basically it's the Venom of the future and Spider-Man of the future. Uh, I've always loved the Spider-Man 2099 stuff. Um, so it's been up my alley, but it's still superheroes. So take of that what you will.
So, let's get directly into the main topic. Talking about gangs. Night.
Indeed.
So originally they kind of spawned out of 2013 in the core 2020 book. Uh, all listing of gangs from those books
Yeah.
have the book reference what was there. But 2020 expanded gang first book. Don't think for a book that just
They
in the
talk about
counter
some, but
list. Yeah.
they don't give us all that many of them.
Yeah, so Night City core book about 32. Choose all of the types we want. We can types kind of categorized below or were added protect. So first type.
We can do that.
Yeah. So first off, you have boosters. The boosters are basically base out of the gangs. Boosters are violent.
Yeah, that they get the main from the 2013 box set. Booster gangs are really the focus of gang life in the future.
The goals are chrome, so gangs like Maelstrom, an example for gang.
Yeah. The first booster gang mentioned in the cyberpunk mythos is the Blood Raisers.
Yep, Blood Raisers, Iron Sights.
The very the Black Queens.
But the Black Queens, I thought they were a guardian.
I don't remember them being a guardian gang, but again, I could be wrong. It's been a while. I always just kind of glossed over them because that name is just it's something. But really, the impetus behind booster games, man, is that they are very combat oriented. They're all about guns and cyber and
murder, rape, robbery.
Yeah, they're about living the fast life as hard as possible. Which is, it's kind of funny when you stop and think about it, because you wonder how they have any longevity to them at all, how they don't just burn out immediately. But I guess if you look at that too closely, it might start to fall apart on you.
And I think a lot of people get confused when other type of gang called chromers. So chromers, you would think, are people who are in a lot of cyberware. Reality is rock band of some sort, specifically chromatic rock. But I think tied to any group, that's one of the descriptions. Violent groupies. How they were.
The Cromer gangs always stood out to me as being one of the weirder concepts, because I mean, if you look back at the 80s and 90s, at the metalhead dudes that everybody thought were tough but were really just like some stoner guys with long hair and denim jackets, that, I don't know, it's
Well, music was very
weird
tribal back then.
yeah, it's you'd have like when you were in high school, there'd be like 15-year-old dudes writing Slayer on everything. Um, God, 80s were the 80s and 90s were kind of embarrassing sometimes. But and that's not a slight against Slayer. They're a perfectly fine band. They just how far people took some stuff. Um, but the idea that they would get together as like a gang and I don't know. I think
Well, you had metalheads, you had punks, you had goths,
sure.
had ska.
Yeah, but I
And
mean, look at any group of goths and tell me, like, sure, they all hang out together, and I guess you could call them a gang, but they're not really ever going to intimidate anybody. You're going to
eh,
hang out under the bridge and
I think they intimidate some people.
sure, no, you're right, and I'm letting my old age get in the way of my imagination at the moment.
Right.
Sorry.
No worries. So yeah, so the Chromers are really just rock fans, genre.
Yeah, they're not quite posers, uh, which is really the next step. Uh, they're like he said, they're basically groupies that hang out together in mass and all around like one band or one group of bands, uh, and that's their representation.
Yep. The next group is Dorfers. So these are pretty much drug addicts. They think they're kind of harmless, but they're looking for some drugs. They're going to prey upon the weak. They're not considered as
Yeah, I
dangerous
mean,
as booster gangers. So.
well, I mean, nobody is because the crazy cyber psycho dudes coming at you in mass is always going to be more terrifying than anything else. But I mean, the crackheads in the alley are pretty damn terrifying.
Yeah, I
And
think a good
yeah,
movie,
Dorfers.
a good movie
Go ahead.
for like um, Dorfer gangs. There was a drugstore cowboy.
Yeah.
That was a
Um,
group of delinquents, basically, for their or yeah.
there was also that really early Leonardo DiCaprio film. I can't remember the
The
name of it off the top.
basketball
Basketball
diaries.
Diaries.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what we can do is we can try and we can try these tie these gangs into like film reference. Um,
get you guys some
no,
inspiration as
yeah, I don't know how well it's going to work. I don't know. I don't know what would be an adequate representation of a Cromer gang.
River's Edge.
Um, that's exactly what was coming to my mind. I didn't want to say it because it's such a disturbing movie.
Yeah,
But yeah, River's Edge, really, really early Keanu Reeves, Crispin Glover, Dennis Hopper. It's a fantastic film, but it's dark. Oh my god, like it's a hard watch.
but they're all
But yeah,
metalheads, you know.
they're all metalheads. They're all 80s metal kids, and that's about the best example I can think of that isn't a goofy comedy.
Boosters, I think, are
Um,
just yeah. There's so many street gang
yeah,
movies
any
out
any
there.
super violent street gang movie you've ever seen from the
Colors would be probably better ones.
Warriors.
Warriors. Well, Warriors
The
had
war
posers too. Warriors had quite a few of the different types.
Right, but at the heart, the Warriors themselves were your basic booster gang.
I always considered
They're
them. Yeah, I suppose. I was thinking
I
they were
mean,
more Guardian, but
yeah, they weren't really trying to protect anything. They were a
well,
gang. They liked to fight.
yeah. So moving on to the next type, you have poser gangs. Poser gangs are pretty much gangs that follow a cult of personality. So a lot are the two big ones that I know of, or actually a few of them. Kennedys, I think, were first. They're gangs that kind of, the Elvises, what else? Boneheads, the Trekkies.
Yeah, it took me a long time to get on board with poser gangs as being something that could actually happen until the whole cosplay scene really started blowing up. Because I don't know, in the '80s, you went to a Star Trek convention or any kind of sci-fi convention and saw a bunch of dudes dressed up in costume. They were not anybody you would ever be afraid of.
Well, if you've ever been
But
in
that
Mike's
whole scene
game,
has changed.
if you've ever been in Mike's game and running the Gilligans against you,
Yeah,
these guys are freaking
rough.
scary, man. The way he plays them.
And that's really where I got on board. As I started to really think about it, and mental. Everybody wants to belong to something. If you can belong to something that is already near and dear to your heart, and become a family due to that shared love that goes beyond, like, we just want to get high, or we just want to, take over this territory. Like, it can become its own thing. I can see that now. Like I said, cosplayers, man, they take up a wide breadth of just across all of society. Like, big dudes, little dudes, all sorts of women and kids and old people. Like, cosplay's become a real thing, and there are bands that get together based around their favorite shows, and I could see some of them being pretty dangerous.
Do you consider bozos to be posers?
Man, bozos are kind of their own
booster.
They're a mix of booster and poser that is just, it's terrifying.
They're kind of a mix of a lot of different types as well. Address bozos. Yeah, so again, in Solo Fortune, you had the posers. The next category were puppets. So puppet gangs, I think, really, I don't think they were their own thing. I think they were just a term.
Yeah, I don't think they were ever represented gangs again.
Yeah, like
outside of that book.
That's, this is the Steel. Iron Sight, I believe, puppets by Aristaka.
Were the Iron Sights used by Aristaka? I thought they were used by Militech. It's been a long time.
Maybe I'm thinking of the Red Crown Legion.
That's probably true. Puppet gangs are gangs who work under the purview of a larger force, usually a corporation or organized crime, like the Yakuza and their relationship with Bosuzoku gangs, or the mafia working with, like, the Italian corner boy gangs. Things like that. Like, they're not part of the larger gang, but they definitely work for them. And there's always that promise inside that gang that they'll get promoted.
Yeah, and puppet gangs are really despised by other gangs as well who aren't puppets. Kind of like how people saw people who sell out.
Yeah, it's basically the same type thing. The organized crime puppet gangs get a little bit of a break on that. But the gangs that are puppets of corporations, like you said, nobody respects those guys. They may fear them, but they're still just seen as, bootlickers.
Yeah. Then you have the Guardian gangs. So those actually came out from the 80s. Gang violence starting to get started started forming their own gangs to
I
prevent
mean,
the
really,
violence.
that
Actually,
goes back much
yeah,
further than the
true.
80s. That goes
Right.
back all the way to the 60s,
Yeah.
where
The
I
Bloods or
mean,
the
that's how the
Crips
Black
that were.
Panthers
Yeah.
started. That's how both the Bloods and the Crips started. Where originally they were just neighborhood protection gangs that, as it didn't take long before them to realize, hey, there's money in this, there's power in this. Oh, we can use this as a front to sell drugs and organize other criminal activities. Like that's, I'm not going to say that's the inevitable way that all Guardian gangs go, but it seems to be a recurring trend. I'll say that in the real world and in the game as well.
Yeah, and I think Night City actually provided some Guardian back alley Ash, Ash. Um,
We absolutely called them the Silver Slash, and that they were all in our game. They were both a Guardian gang and a Cromer gang who just loved Johnny Silverhand.
that what
This
they?
was back when he was still alive.
Yeah. It, Silverhand.
I don't remember. I just remember I don't think we ever touched him again after the first couple of years we played.
But they are a Cromer gang. A
Yeah,
Guardian Cromer gang.
they are in fact a Guardian Cromer.
Nice. And then the last gang type, at least solo, is nihilist. So nihilists, they're pretty much terrorists.
Very doom and gloom. Yeah, they are
About mass
they have a
murder
very
and
bleak outlook on the world, uh, a very bleak outlook on their own lives, and uh, very much a mindset of I don't really have anything left to lose because everything is shit anyway. Um,
so the so that was ended the kind of the base that were the core types that Solo Fortune present. Protect and Serve actually brought in three new categories. First one is called culties. So these are groups who are basically form some type of philosophy or religion that they follow. Inquisitors is the primary example of culties.
yeah,
Um, they also reference that the Red Chrome Legion would also be considered culties because of fascist, white supremacist type of
yeah.
attitude.
There's a reason the other gangs just stomp them whenever they get a chance.
You would also have like any uh, any of billets from type of cult religion.
Religion, philosophy, just general outlook. I mean, uh, everybody following under the the onus of a very specific mindset, be it religious, be it philosophical, be it uh, economical. I mean, you're Proud Boys. They're
Yeah,
they're zealots. Like most of your racist gangs are going to fall under these categories.
because they have one major philosophy. Stick with it.
Yeah.
Uh, other type of gang that was introduced were party gangs. which the piranhas are one. I don't. They are different than like. I would say they're kind of a blend of chromers and
Dorfers.
dorfers, in that they're not as addicted to drugs as dorfers. I can see party gangs eventually becoming dorfer gangs, but I also
Yeah,
don't.
I
You,
can see them definitely having a lot of close ties to Dorfers as well. Like there being a lot of intermingling there. Uh, but they're basically your rave kids. They'll go in to like an abandoned warehouse, set up a rave or a party, get the word out, and that's their thing. You actually see this represented in 2077 with the you'll just see spontaneous dance parties going on around somebody's pickup truck all
yeah,
over the place in 2077. Um, it's
usually,
kind of funny. You'll go to like Maelstrom, and there'll just be a bunch of dudes and chicks dancing around a freaking pickup truck in the middle of a parking lot somewhere.
yeah, hate those guys. As
I don't
soon
know.
as
Sometimes I go and dance with them.
well, you can, but sometimes you start firing and you try to fire back and you kill innocent. Not only the gangs to fight, but they also the cops coming.
Yeah, that's very true. Which is why you don't hang out with party boys.
And the last gang type is go gangs. They are the Osozuka gangs.
Yeah,
Kind of
speed
a
tribes.
yeah, and they kind of have died out, but you would definitely see them as like even in the U.S. have the Hell's Angel
I mean,
mongrels.
in Japan, they didn't really die out so much as evolved as the members all got old. Uh,
Came
like it became, or they just went on to like the car culture, like the drift culture and whatnot.
through.
Um, but yeah, it also these go gangs. They're just any kind of speed tribe, like gangs based around motorcycles or cars, or they're not nomads because they're static to wherever they've got their territory. Uh, it sets them apart. Although some of the RAF and Shiv gangs could be considered, but yeah, you're like you said, your Harley's Angels or Hell's Angels, your Mongols, your uh, any gang that likes to go fast.
For those who are joining us late, just a quick update. I know we said that we're going to have Thaddeus House. However, he had computer issues. We are talking about gangs.
We will be rescheduling. We may even do a pre-recorded show so we can get on his schedule. So he will be appearing on the show probably next episode. Uh, but unfortunately, he was not able to make it tonight. So yeah, like you said, we're talking about gangs and what we do with them.
Right. So, main specific gang. I think, you know, of 2077, I think a lot of the gangs evolved over the years, and some of them have died out. Some of them turned into.
Well, plus we're forgetting just your basic street gangs because those still exist. You've still got your Bloods and your Crips and all that just encompass like a wide variety of all that kind of stuff.
Well, the Bloods evolved
Uh,
into its own nomad name.
true, true. I'm just talking about like those street level crime gangs. They still exist.
Right.
That don't necessarily quantify into any of the other types we talked about because they encompass all of them or a large swath of them, as it were. But yeah, a lot of the gangs that were presented took drastic changes. Originally, the Voodoo Boys were a Dorfer gang. They were a drug dealing gang that worked out of the University District. Um, in my personal game, they evolved quite a bit just in a few years. They had new leadership and they became very. They specialized in information brokering and blackmail, as well as uh, designer drugs, as opposed to basically being weed dealers at the college.
Yeah, so
Um,
I know that that had the background, but I actually took inspiration from Predator 2,
yeah, so
King Willie, right? And
King Willie's
using
the
it.
coolest.
Yeah. And I kind of always made them into that kind of like mysticism, kind of
Mm-hmm.
creepiness. When I was implementing either,
Yeah,
Knight's Edge or the stuff with from Interface Volume 2, Issue 2, which included Cthulhu stuff. I would always have that, the Voodoo Boys, kind of be kind of the main introduction of the supernatural into Cyberpunk game that I always creeps.
yeah. For me, it was a cross between King Willie and his gang from Predator 2 and uh, the way the voodoo priests worked in was it Serpent and the Rainbow, where basically they use their drugs and hallucinogens and their religion to gain influence in like the government and the ruling parties in the city they're
Right?
in. It might not have been Serpent in the Rainbow. It's the one where they put spider eggs in the chick's makeup and it was fucked up.
I think that was her.
Like suddenly she gets to the yeah, I think so.
Gets to the party and she like starts freaking out.
Yeah, and then the
Yeah.
spiders erupt from her face.
Yeah. Fun stuff like that.
Yeah, so that's what it became in my game. Um, very under the scenes, uh, or behind the scenes type actions. Uh, the Voodoo Boys, and then of course in 2077 and Red, the Voodoo Boys went a completely different direction. They became a net running gang, which is its own thing. There are lots of net running gangs in 2020, and yeah, like the Brainiacs, and that's what they evolved into with the Voodoo Boys.
Yeah, and
Um,
and I think that's the one thing that I think the Brainiacs of 2020 are really the Voodoo Boys of 2077, and that's
Basically, yeah,
and that's kind of how I played them. Very standoffish. You never really saw them on the street. Um, had to see them because they
yeah,
were not going to
and
allow themselves to be exposed.
very much, everything's done through like drop boxes and uh, speaking through holes in walls and shit. Um, very secretive, uh, very effective. And at the time, I mean, hacker gangs are real today. They were real back then. It wasn't so much computer hacking at the time as it was more like freaking and just knowing the codes for stuff.
Well, that's the low
Uh,
level, you know.
yeah, or the old school brainiacs, like the old guys who were there in the beginning. They still, in my game, they still kept up the old ways just because you never want to get out of practice.
Another game that I use quite a bit. Games. I think every single.
They were always a major threat.
Yeah, and I think every single game had one encounter. Just because they're a nuisance. Players often liked destroying them, taking them out.
Yeah, they didn't appear in all my games, but the threat of them was always there. There would always be stories in the background of, you know, inquisitors went on a raid and like grabbed some couple off the street and ripped off their cyberware and left them bleeding on the side of the road. Zealots are scary.
Yeah.
And
but I think there was
the thing
one
about zealots is they'll always go for the weakest target.
I think there's one misconception I've always saw with an Inquisitioner since the beginning is they're anti-chrome, but they're fine with biotech, right, and nanites.
Yeah, there's definitely some hypocrisy going on
there. So do not be afraid to give them skin weave.
Yeah, very strange mental gymnastics.
I think it's more or less that you're not looking as human as you should. No.
I think there are probably different, in my game anyway, there are different factions of Inquisitors that, you know, many of them don't get along, kind of like, you know, Baptists and Methodists and Catholics and Mormons. They don't get along. Unless it's against a common threat. But yeah, so you've got some who are just pure no augmentation of any kind. And then others who are, you know, you can't have any of that, but we can have some of this.
And for a gang that has been, you know, about 20, I think Red, they're the one thing that really got to me, especially in the Night City source book, was that they weren't given like a good full write-up like all these other gangs, right? So, like to the Black Queens, don't know who the Black Queens were, you know? To me, the Inquisitors should have had that space and that write-up of them. Yeah.
Some of that cool Chris Hockabout art.
Exactly. Speaking of Chris Hockabout, have the Bozos, which are a completely crazy. They are.
Yeah, they're
outside of the posers.
They're
I think all of us didn't think, you know, oh, clown gang, come on, didn't exist, and then insane clown posse at the street, those became a thing.
Yeah. Plus, you had movies like Stephen King's It, where clowns are suddenly terrifying, or real life events like John Wayne Gacy. Like in the '80s, clowns were scary. Even on the low budget like satire films, you had killer clowns from outer space.
Yep.
Yeah, clowns in the '80s were terrifying. I never cared for clowns because I thought they were tacky. They never like personally scared me. I just thought they were kind of tacky. But I love how much they scare other people. So for that reason, like the Bozos just hit people on a visceral level. Kind of like the Joker, but much like a whole gang of Jokers, but much more flamboyant, if that makes any sense. Like they're all about the big shoes and looking like Bozo, which is where they get their name.
Yeah. And if you don't think, you know, bozos, one guy who have tattooed their face
Yeah,
to
like
look
clown
like a
makeup.
clown. Like, oh
Yeah.
my god, you have to live with that for the rest of your life. And even like I saw an interview with forget the guy's name. He saw it and he don't do that. He's this is makeup. I can wash this off. But to tattoo it,
I
you're
mean,
crazy.
in truth, most juggalos are pretty harmless.
Yeah.
But like if you get a hundred of those guys coming at you walking down the street, I don't care who you are, you're gonna go the other direction. Like,
Yeah, and that's one of the prophecies that the Pondsmith created, because I believe that was Lisa's invention.
yeah,
Who didn't think it
a
was going to be
good.
possible, and yet it is.
I mean, the consensus was is we didn't think that any group of clowns would last long enough on the streets to become a threat because the minute they showed up, every other gang would be like, kill them all. But I mean, we've got the Philharmonic Vampires, which are kind of like lesser, more stylish bozos.
They're the goths.
Yeah, they're the goth bozos. They um, dress like are they the mimes or are the mimes the
Juilliards.
Juilliards? There you go. The Juilliards are the mimes, and every time I see them, all I think about there was a Bobcat Goldthwait movie called Shakes the Clown, where every time they see mimes, they just chase after him to beat him up.
Yeah. Shakes the Clown is actually a good movie for if you want some inspiration for.
It is. It is. Um, that was Bobcat's directorial debut.
And that's what I always used. Always the victim of the either Philharmonic Vampires or the
Mimes.
Bozos.
Yeah.
Um, just because the players wouldn't be like, okay, that gang is distracted. We're moving along.
Who was it? Who we had somebody on our show who like their favorite gang was the Philharmonic Vampires, and I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. They would be.
Benjamin?
I, I thought it was Will, but I
No, Will Moss, like the Conehead, talked about how he developed them.
that's
He
true.
wanted to take it a further step.
Maybe Ed. I don't know. We've interviewed a lot of people. That question.
Yeah.
We ask them that question every time. So
Yeah, I got to go through all those interviews, write down all show
oh
statistics
yeah, we
on
should really be cataloging all this stuff.
It's how amateur we are.
Yeah, but I just like to think I can keep it all in my head and keep it organized. When obviously that was.
When you get to a certain age, you need to start writing.
I'm lucky if I can remember to wear matching socks.
Listen, keep your comic lore in your head as long as possible.
I was really hoping to talk to Thaddeus because, in addition to everything else, Thaddeus is the answer man and just a comic book expert. And I was really looking forward to having an actual conversation about that. But yeah, next time.
So I think like when it came to Red, the list of gangs did did shrink. I think some of them merged, and it's evolution that some of them are. One
Yeah,
thing
I was
I
gonna say I don't know that the number of gangs has shrunk. Just there's not the same amount of source material, so what we're seeing seems smaller. And some of those gangs have disappeared or shrunk, like you said.
the one thing I think Red did came to gang, coming up with a gang, Onyx, because you
Yeah,
know
like
when
that would be the next logical step from the poser gangs would be gangs of exotics.
because Night City was produced prior to Chrome 2, or around the same time, which means there's a good chance that they just got uh, a spotlight. But I could see exotics coming because furry
Well,
community.
uh, they did kind of exist in 2020. In oh my god, my brain is jello. The Nomad source book.
Neotribes?
Neotribes. God, I am getting so old. In Neotribes, in the adventure or in the back, there's a family of exotic nomads. I don't know how that really would work. Like you'd just be picking dirt out of your fur forever, but there is a nomad family made up, or at least a pack made up entirely of exotics. So the idea was there. It just never got translated into an established gang in Night City. And I think you're right. I think they kind of missed the boat with that with Red. Um,
I mean, Danger
I'm
Gal,
glad that
uh,
yeah,
that organization, it's kind of exotics. Yeah, but
I'm glad it wasn't represented in 2077 because I think that would just it would become too much of the focus and what was appearing on the streets, and it would just look weird for just the way video games work.
yeah,
When you have resources in a video game, you use them as much as you can. So if like a third of the population in Night City is exotic, that would just look really weird.
true. And then
Um,
you also have full Borgs. Individuals are treated as full Borgs.
I mean, and I don't see. I know she's portrayed as a full Borg, but Lizzie Wizzy, I don't know. Her skin's too soft for me to think of her as a full Borg. And I know it's a real skin covering that for some reason she decided to make chrome, but
Well, it's
I don't
synth
know.
skin, right?
I would have liked to have seen one normal, like lower, basically an alpha body, full body conversion.
Well, I would say
I would have
Songbird
liked to have seen.
is definitely a full Borg.
Yeah, but she's like a flesh weed type, like Chromebook 4 monstrosity looking full conversion.
Yeah.
Like her face looks normal and the shape of her body is kicking, but like she's parts.
Anyways, back to gang.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So I think they kind of missed on that. Oh, came to exotics. I think exotics are definitely a lot of people. Not a fan, but you know, each their own.
Yeah,
Wrong with that.
same here. Like, but I mean, exotics extend beyond just the furry community. You've also got play beings and uh, things like that, where you just make yourself look ridiculously, like cartoonishly hot, or make yourself look like an anime person, whatever. There's all sorts of uh, there's all sorts of exotics beyond just making yourself look like an animal. There's the fantasy races, make yourself look like an orc or an elf, blah blah blah. Uh,
So you
like I said, I'm
can.
glad the video game didn't get into it.
Well,
For the same reason, I'm glad that they didn't represent like a whole gang of bozos where it was just the one guy, because then you'd be running into clowns everywhere and it would lose all impact.
true. It's true. Though they did a great bozo.
Yeah, Bozo Ozab was awesome. Like the grenade for a nose, that shit's hilarious to me. Like that's I would have never thought of that in a million years.
Yeah, so those are kind of at least a smattering of gangs. I know there's other ones that kind of gone through various evolutions, like the Maelstrom, or just a combat gang. Yes, they were cybered, but not to the extent of just looking more robot when it came to 2077. The Valentinos
Yeah.
were kind of a small gang, Night City sourcebook, but kind of evolved in gang. Terror Claws was kind of the same way. One of those gangs that was a small little burb that kind of, I believe they were a puppet for Arasaka originally, and
I think so too.
they kind of still are a puppet, but don't know, right? Depending on
I
them.
I would have been very curious to see what happened to the Steel Dragons, Yorinobu's gang, in between 2020 and Red. Like for some reason, I want to believe that they, in my head canon, that they infiltrated the Tiger Claws. Uh,
I could see that.
or were just wiped out by them. But for some reason, I want to think that there's still some of those guys out there directly under his control.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, especially since Yorinobu kind of was back in the organization and probably trying to solidify his power, right?
Yeah.
Within Arasaka, using them to help with that. Yeah, so that's kind of like an overview of them. The new gangs that were introduced: Sixth Street, which is a Guardian gang. Definitely can see that evolving from some of the Guardian gangs, especially with
They're
the veterans coming
kind of a
back in.
culty gang too.
Culty in that they're ex-military.
Culty in that they're very nationalistic. I never trust any group of nationalists. They just
And USA, man, all the way.
they're very much a militia, and I've yet to meet any militias that weren't nuts.
Or
I'm sure
delusional.
there's some exist out there that are perfectly fine and sane, but I haven't met any yet.
The other gang that was dead is the Scabs. I
Yeah,
despise that gang so
yeah, they
much.
are the most universally hated street gang, uh,
I thought I hated the Juilliard,
possibly in
but
video game history. Like they are just the worst of the worst. Um, and they are what they sound like. Jesus, they're terrifying and disgusting and reprehensible, and they are shoot on sight. Like
always.
no one wants to deal with them. They're just horrible, horrible people. And they live on the suffering and misery of others.
But yeah, that's, and again, when you start getting into gangs, that's when you really need to go back to your session zero and determine exactly how foul
Yeah,
2020 or sorry 2077 really portrayed how
the
evil
gangs in
gangs can.
27, they're so fucking dark. Like they're just dark, and the things they do are horrifying. Like so far beyond what I would expect from a video game that like it disturbs you afterwards when you think about it.
Oh,
In
some
the
of
same
those
way that like
missions, yeah.
watching the movie Seven, like it just disturbs you. And no gang is free from this. Like even the gangs you like, uh, they've got some dark corners where the monsters are coming up out of the beds. The only gangs that, like, even the Mox has some monsters under the bed. Uh, the Aldecaldos really are the only ones that don't have anything ridiculously egregious, although they get close to the line sometimes.
Yep. Yeah. So gangs that I've kind of created. Um, there's been four of them outside of and of recent I've kind of started creating just because I didn't want to play in or have other people's how a gang should work. I think that's one of the challenges when you have anything that is published. There's an expectation of how that gang is going to be talked about with Voodoo Boys and how I've changed them from published to how I interpreted they would like. So I kind of like decided, okay, I'm going to create my own gangs specifically because I was using different territories of Night City. From 2020, the majority of the gangs that are published in the book are specifically city center, quote unquote, just because of how the maps have changed throughout the expansions of the game. So my four gangs were basically a party gang called the Neon Brigade. They're kind of like a hip hop type of gang that kind of was information brokers for them or the party. The other gang which I created was one of the players had a sister who was involved with this gang, and I actually borrowed it from specific history, which is the Omens of Downfall, which was actually a Japanese gang. Japanese girls, basically schoolgirls who kind of became woods and kind of were the counter to the Go gangs. And kind of reintroduced them, so it's an all-women's gang. I also have the Apastas de la Morte, who are a Go gang who I kind of modeled off of Mexican ethnicity, and a lot of they're close to like the whole Day of the Dead type of thing. They wear
like sugar skulls and whatnot.
Yeah, there's actually a specific term for. But yeah, they kind of like look like that, and kind of terrorize the streets. And then the last gang were the Wolves of Flesh, who are basically completely insane, cannibalistic gang from the combat, who kind of a cult, basically psychopaths. They're not the thuggy. It's actually this group of people from India who into cannibalism. They're kind of completely like opposite of humanity. Proud of it. Anything that is a humanity is a norm for humanity, they try to go completely in the right. Don't exactly who they are, but like they. So in India, right? Normally, you people who have they take the bodies and usually burn them on the Ganges River, right? Well, this group of people actually goes out, grabs grabs the bones and wears them as like decorations, eats their bones, does like covers themselves in ash and just are like
Huh.
completely like this is real world, and these guys are like really psychopaths. Um, I
Yeah,
actually
that sounds pretty
saw,
terrible.
yeah, I saw a British reporter trying to interview them, and he was talking to one of them, and the guy was like, if you keep on talking, I'm gonna fucking kill you and eat you. British, because they had it on camera, and
That's
the
the end of the
British
interview.
reporter were like just stopped talking, kind of looked at the camera like, I think we need to get out of here.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that gang is kind of based off of that depravity. Um, and again, you know, definitely want to make sure your party is comfortable. Players are comfortable with going down any type of dark themes. But that's kind of like my gang that I use if I want to go dark, and the players want that.
I I've got lots of gangs that I've created for my game. The best collection of that is in my uh, district guide to the combat zone article on Datafortress2020, the source book I did for that, where I go into detail on the larger gangs in the combat zone. There's just a ton of gangs I created as well as pre-existing ones. Um, but regardless, any representation of a gang in my game, I will scale that to the game itself, uh, like just how dark things get. And I can't say that I've ever gone as dark as some of the stuff in the Cyberpunk game in 2077. Like some of that shit is like what happens to Evelyn Parker. That's really fucking dark, and it would take a. I can't say that nothing in my game has ever been that dark, but it takes a very, very specific, very mature group of players to handle that kind of thing. Um, Whereas most people just want the gangs to be goons. And while it's rare that I get that PG with it, uh, more often than not, it's closer to that than closer to the dark side of 2077. Um, Gangs in my game tend to run anywhere from movies like The Warriors or The Last Dragon to uh, Colors or um, Menace to Society, uh, things of that nature. Uh, Somewhat recognizable, or mostly recognizable in terms of, they're gangs. They do their thing. They stick together. They work in numbers, and they're pretty underhanded. Uh, some of them have more what could be considered honor than others. Um, I don't know. I've got guardian gangs. I've got a little bit of everything, um, including my own like super like I've got the dead zoners in my combat zone who basically are the same as your uh, wolves of the flesh or whatever
Yeah,
gang, where they're just they're cannibals and they're horrible, basically homeless, living in the sewers, uh, grabbing people off the streets when they're alone and stuff. Like just horrible, horrible people. But then in the same combat zone, I've also got, uh, I've also got Bushido, who are a gang that's basically, Kung Fu Guardian gang.
yeah, the Bushidos. I love that.
I do
Those
too.
guys.
Um, Slaughterhouse and Maelstrom are there. Oh, there's a giant list of gangs there that you can check out if anybody's interested. More than enough to fill out whatever encounter you're trying to have in a combat zone setting. And I've got tons of other gangs for the rest of Night City that I just haven't written out yet. I'm halfway. Before I got my back injury, I was halfway through writing a source book about another district guide for an Asian gang called the Ghost Disciples. It's like a Southeast Asian, Vietnamese and Thai, Burmese gang that are basically been kicked out of like the other heavily Asian influenced areas of the city, like the Japanese and the Chinese and the Koreans. They've all said like the population of the Southeast Asians has been forced into this other little area where they've got to basically do their own thing. They're kind of bitter about that.
Now, have you ever run a gang campaign and that the players were part of a gang?
I have. It was that campaign with the Ghost Disciples.
Okay.
That was a gang comes from a gang campaign where they're trying to not only make their way up in the gang itself, as well as dealing with their outside rivals, but yeah, I don't want to go too much into it, but yes, I very much enjoyed running that campaign. I wish I could have continued, but sadly, I got hurt and couldn't do it anymore.
Real world happened. No.
Real world happened.
One thing, the downfall of a lot of good campaigns. Right. So I've never really run a gang. Gangs are as kind of like a hindrance or obstacle. I've never really gotten in fleshing out a gang, fleshing out a structure. I suppose that the campaign I'm running now, the High Riders had organization. I could definitely see me going in and kind of this structure with I have various factions constantly fighting amongst themselves in a territory. You have leaders and lieutenants and the underlings trying to build that hierarchy. Is that what you did with your campaign? Did you flesh out a hierarchy of the gang, or was it something that no?
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely a hierarchy. All the main members of the gang were written up as NPCs. There were a bunch of like goons as well that were just hangers on and soldiers and whatnot. But all the dudes who were above the players themselves. The players themselves started out as very low level members. And I had fleshed out the hierarchy above them, as well as a number of. By the time the game got really going, I had fleshed out a number of contacts and basically their whole structure and how they operate had been codified. One of these days, I'm going to finish that because I really enjoyed it. It's a small section. It takes place in a smaller section of Night City, but I did a lot of work on it. And even beyond that, even before that game, like I'd run a lot of street level games, and a lot of cop and private investigator games where gangs had a pretty big part. mostly as enemies, but sometimes as allies. Sometimes the players would work closely with gangs. So even then, I've got a lot of stuff on the back burner that's fleshed out for future use.
Well, I mean, just your combat zone itself, you know, you definitely fleshed out quite a bit of zones as well as the gang territory.
Yeah.
I don't know if I would give that much information, expose all that information to my players and allow them access to it. That's just me.
Uh, what's funny is at the time I was creating this, my players almost never looked at my website. The only thing they ever looked at were the gear lists. Like they'd see me writing all this stuff, they'd know what I was working on, but they just, I don't know, for whatever reason, uh, they didn't care about the internet.
Really? Cyberpunk players not caring about the internet? What the hell?
It was weird. It was weird. I don't know. They were very uh, cat videos and porn. Like that's what they were into as far as the internet
Whoa! I think we're going to a darker place. I think we need to have a
Totally.
session zero about what.
But yeah, so I was able to get away with a lot writing it down on my site. And even now, if I'm working on something that the players aren't supposed to know, I'll tell them, "Hey, you don't want to look through this. You'll just end up spoiling it for yourself. Like, I'm not going to hide your Christmas presents, but I'm not going to feel bad for you when you screw up the surprise either."
Well, you can always say, hey, if you make a streetwise roll at this
Mm-hmm.
number, you go check out this link.
Also, like anything else, it's just so I can keep it in my head. And if I write
Yeah.
it down, what's the point of writing something down and not sharing it?
Yeah. Yeah, because I'm going through your. Because I've been here before multiple times, and I'm just still amazed at how much lore you kind of wrote up for a lot of these gangs. And it's not a small
Like,
list.
no, no. It's definitely not a small list. It definitely wasn't something that I did overnight. It was a large project, and you don't want to see the list of other gangs that exist outside the combat zone that I've got similar amounts of information for.
So, what do you think is makes a good cyberpunk? Think it's style over
uh,
substance? Do you think it's substance over style?
for me, it's believability in the context of what's going on. Having a booster gang like Maelstrom, if they were operating out of, say, the corporate zone, that wouldn't make any sense. Like, the corporate zones aren't going to allow that shit. They're not going to tolerate that shit to be going on in their streets. You're fucking with our profits. Um, in the same token, like the bozos wouldn't last in the combat zone because the minute they appeared, they'd just be shot. So it's context within, it's realism within, not realism, believability within the
Hmm.
context. Uh, and giving each gang its own identity. Like that doesn't necessarily mean like a uniform or anything like that, but you want to know who they are and what they're about, what they stand for, if anything. Um, what's important to them.
Yeah, for me, you want, especially with any gang, you want to present them not always as a threat. Yes, they're always going to oppose themselves as a war, but most gangs are trying to pose as a threat and an intimidation to the common citizen, and the
Yeah.
players are not common citizens. And I've had that situation happen where the players are walking down the street and they get confronted with a gang, and of course they're like a little edgy about it. But when the gang member pulls out, a knife, and that knife is only doing, a d6 plus 1 or plus 2 damage against their SP of, 14, 16, and the ganger ain't doing crap against the person, the player is often like, oh, these guys are pretty damn easy. Like, okay, I shoot him in the leg, and he's
It's
like,
very
yeah,
much
he doesn't have any armor in his
crocodile.
leg. Yeah.
Your crocodile Dundee. Oh, that's not a knife. This is a knife.
Right.
Situation.
Right. Which also sets the players up for when they do confront a more deadly gang, right? So, like for me, Maelstrom is more of a deadly gang because they are more cyber. They have more of nastiness that's going to inflict them. Yeah. And that's when the players then are like, yeah, all right, I just pull out my gun and say, beat the streets. Maelstrom's gonna like, yeah, go F yourself, man. Give me all your money. And then a fight ensues, and that's when real threat becomes the players starting to get scared of like, oh shit, I dealt with the wrong gang, right? And knowing, because you want that lifestyle, at least in a city environment, that yes, you're going to find gangs that are, but they're going to try to seem like they're a threat. And
yeah, they're it's like in the Warriors where they come across the orphans.
Yeah.
And the orphans are even like letting them have their respect until they push it just a little too far, and then the Warriors are basically like, "You guys are nothing. You're nothing. We could have rolled over you any minute. We were trying to be cool." And then, of course, the real like the baseball furies show up, and everything. It's runtime.
Yeah, well, baseball furies were not only a threat, but they're also psychopaths.
Exactly.
Kind of like the bozos. Yeah, and that's the other thing, right? Is my players, they kind of have a fear of the Inquisitors, but they also have a hatred for them. So they're willing to stay and fight. Versus the bozos, if they see one, they'll stay and fight. If they see less than the number of bozos equal to the party, they'll stay and fight. But as soon as they start seeing bozos outnumbering them, at least in my game, they know we got to run. You need to get the hell out of here. We're not dealing with that many.
It's runtime. And yeah, that's the other part of it is understand how like when you introduce the gang, before you introduce them, have an idea in your head how dangerous they're going to actually be at their average and at their worst. Because at their average, it's just dudes hanging out on a corner. They're not going to be packing their best weapons, their best armor, or anything like that. They're just dudes hanging out on a corner. They're going to be armed. Some of them might be armored, but they're generally, it's going to be pretty light stuff. What those big guns are going to be, if it's like a corner street gang, their biggest gun may be that one of them owns an old AK, or they've got like a submachine gun, shotguns. They'll all have handguns. usually, like for a small street gang, will be in the 9 millimeter.
Yeah,
They're not going to be packing giant stuff. They're not going to be walking around with anything more than like an SP10 bulletproof vest. Uh, it's going to be low level stuff,
and I think with Night City
and
Sourcebook,
even then, it'll only be like the leaders who have
yeah,
that.
Night City Sourcebook kind of gives a referee the ability to gauge exactly how a game is going to. And
Yeah,
I know because of their threat level. Now, I don't believe major gang threat level.
no, because the major gangs, they're just all like, well, these guys are super fucking dangerous. Don't fuck with them. Uh,
But
don't fuck with Maelstrom. They will eat your feet,
yeah.
like
So
with ranch dressing.
the threat code is nice. Like to have seen maybe a little bit understanding of it, but expanded. But I think it's a good way of creating a quick. Uh, of course, the opposite of just your run of the mill gang, right, is if the players screw over a corporation, you do have puppet gangs, or a corporation is probably more likely to go through either edgerunners or puppet gangs to attack the party and get retribution. They're not
I
going to
mean, puppet
send.
gangs play a huge role in my game. In my game, they are. They're not gonna like if it's just one dude who does the corporation dirty, uh, causes like a minor inconvenience. They're not gonna send Adam Smasher after that fucking guy. They're gonna pay the local street gang to go fuck him up and then forget about it. They're completely deniable. Uh, they don't care if the how many of those gang members die. They're not paying their life insurance, their medical bills. They just want a quick result, and that's what puppet gangs are all about. Hey, go do this shit for the corporation. You'll get paid for it. If you do
And
it,
they're
if
expendable.
you do enough jobs, yeah, totally expendable. If you do enough jobs well enough, one of those gang members, again, like I said earlier, gets promoted. Uh, but at the end of the day, they're all write-offs. They're off the books. They're not like yeah, they're expendable.
And RoboCop is kind of like a good move to go by. The main corporate
Yeah,
is using a gang to basically.
exactly.
Old Bob.
Um, good old Bob. Uh, I mean the main bad gang there in RoboCop totally works for Bob, and yeah, they are 100% a puppet gang. They're dangerous in their own right, but when they're under the employ of OCP through the illicit sources and off the books and payments under the table, uh, they end up being their big bargaining chip, as it were. You got a problem with the cops, you send these four bozos out to go take care of it.
Yeah. So what else with.
Um, I don't know. There's gangs are such an integral part of cyberpunk and just life on the streets, that they, even if you don't actively use them, they need to be a presence in your game. Even if your characters are corporates living the high life, anytime they're in the back of a limo riding through the streets, they should notice that gang presence. They should know that if they get out of the limo, they're in danger. Even your like hardcore solos, they're not going to take these threats lightly. They shouldn't take gang presence. No matter how badass they get, they shouldn't treat them like they're not a threat. Because it's cyberpunk and everything is a threat. No matter how badass you get, a 12-year-old with a 22 can still take you out in one shot. Well, I say that, but if you're a full conversion, probably likely. But as long as you still got the fleshy bits, you're in danger.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, gangs are definitely something that you need to add with the atmosphere. And
Yeah.
especially, so my last Night City campaign, I did have players who were, they were trying to find abandoned buildings to live, basically squat, right? As players are trying to reduce their costs. So even though they're paying rent, and it's very cheap rent, they're actually buying off gangs, whether it's production gangs.
Yeah.
Keep an eye on their place or whatever. So a lot of my players cannot afford to be living in the mod. So if you're living in the combat zone, the players are going to interact with a gang of some sort, because that gang is the gang that protects the block or protects the building. Players are going to be renting from. Not really renting, they're just paying off a gang to prevent their stuff from being stolen or broken into, kind of protected. So gangs, to my mind, are always going to be players, especially live the cheap life. Too many players who prefer to live. As every time
living on the edge.
Yeah. Well, anytime my characters get money, I'm like, okay, I'm moving out. I'm moving to a better place.
Exactly.
If I can afford it, I'm going to have a holdout that I'm also going to buy. I'm going to make sure I have, insurance and all these, and good food and all this other stuff. And while other players are like, oh, I want to buy a new arm. Okay, you're still living in squalor. Yeah, but it's going to improve my combat. I'm like, yeah, but you're still living in squalor.
You're like the dude who buys rims for his new pickup while his kids are barefoot. Like, dude, where the hell are your priorities? Get the fuck out of the combat zone.
Exactly. Yeah, so what other movies? Because I know we talked about The Warriors, Colors, RoboCop, some other movies that are out there. I think
Menace to Society, New
Jack City, I think is definitely.
New Jack City is about as good as it gets.
Yeah, and I think you could definitely write a scenario or a campaign in which you have to infiltrate the block that
I've said it before.
Not his mine. I forgot his name.
The best example I can give of what the combat zone looks like in my game is Death Wish 3.
I've never watched the Death Wish series.
Okay, it is so utterly ridiculous and over the top, but at the same time, like, the character of Charles Bronson gets called by an old army vet to go. I forget if it was supposed to be Harlem or the Bronx. It's 80s New York City,
right?
So just fucking war zone. And he meets this family that are all like he goes to his friend's apartment building, and there are other families that decide to pay him to protect him. And there are gangs that are just coming out of every freaking, like, out of the woodwork. It's a good example of what the combat zone in my game is going to feel like. I'm not saying it's a good movie, but you should check it out just for that, just for the feel of the combat zone. Um, Dread or Raid to Redemption, because
Red
it's
is a good
almost
one.
kind of the same movie. Um, the way the gangs take over the block in that is very much like New Jack City.
City of God, I think, is also
City of God
good.
is fantastic. Um, Judgment Night was pretty good.
Yeah, it's
Any of
training.
those
Training Day was also
90s,
good.
early 90s gangster movies work really well. Um,
I think
those were
the epitome
pretty
was
much the
Escape from New York or Escape from L.A.
yeah 100%. Um, I mean, Escape from New York is the birthplace of the idea of the combat zone. Um, no one's ever gonna convince me otherwise. Uh, it was a little more post-apocalypse than your Cyberpunk 2020 game is gonna be, but the idea is there.
Yep. Yeah, I think covered a lot about gangs. Um,
Yeah,
done. I've run out.
yeah. I mean, I can just keep talking about movies, but eventually that's
Yeah,
gonna get pretty boring.
exactly.
Uh,
So I think I hope everyone enjoyed our conversation. Again, apologize for Thaddeus. We'll have him on if happens, and you know, situations happen like that. So hopefully we will get him on either on the next broadcast or within the next few. So please stay tuned. I'm kind of very interested in talking with him. A little intimidated because I know his body of work at least recently. So he is definitely a renaissance man from the skill sets he has. So be a very interesting conversation with him. So with that said, you got anything else you want to talk about, Wisdom?
I think that about does it. Yeah, I'll let you do your outro and then I'll do mine.
All right. Well, everyone, I am glad you stayed till the end. I am Cybersmily. I have a site called cybersmily.net. It has a bunch of utilities to help you run Cyberpunk 2020 as well as Cyberpunk Red, and you have some lore stuff. I also posted the four gangs I mentioned underneath my peeps section. So if you want to hear a little small write up of those gangs, by all means, go check it out. I also have a combat zone generator. So again, if you want to get your own gang and give them a zone to live in, pay for that. I have a Discord server as well as hanging out on Cybernation Uncensored's Discord. We have a Forlorn Dopes channel there. Please check it out. If you have questions for us or want us to discuss certain topics, by all means, post your questions there. I'm also on a ton of Discord servers, Discord channels. I'm mostly a worker. I'm also on the Cyberpunk Red and Cyberpunk 2020 Reddits. Currently for the 20 Reddits, posting hopefully some funny, humorous memes around Cyberpunk 2020. A lot of people have been enjoying it. And that's about it.
All right. I am Derek Bernier. They call me Wisdom 000. I don't know if anybody actually calls me that, but
D Rock, I
what I
call you
go
that.
by. Yeah, that too. D Rock still works. I run Datafortress2020.com, the largest and most comprehensive Cyberpunk 2020 site out there. Among the many things you'll find on my site is the Combat Zone District Guide that we were talking about, where I have a write up of like more gangs than I can count off the top of my head. Um, by all means, please come and check that out. I'm also on Facebook on the Data Fortress 2020 Facebook group, as well as the Cyberpunk 2020 Facebook group and the Cyber Nation Uncensored 20 Facebook group. I mod for all three of those, so you can get a hold of me there. I lurk on both Reddit and the Discords, more so on Reddit. At the various Cyberpunk sites there, or threads, posts, channel. I don't know what you call that. Yeah, so if you can get a hold of us through any of those means, please do. We love to hear your comments, criticisms, suggestions, complaints, anything you got, anything you want to let us know. We'd love to hear from you. We'd like to thank Rob Mulligan and Cyber Nation Uncensored for hosting us. And yeah, we'll see you guys
2 weeks.
in 2 weeks.
Yep. And to our American friends, have a happy 4th.
Yeah. Happy Independence Day.
And to our UK people, your election goes well.
Indeed.
Till next time.